Bon dia, good morning. My name is Pastora Martinez Samper. I'm Vice President for Globalization and Cooperation at the Open University of Catalonia. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this last and fourth keynote lecture of the ICEA 2022. And after different approaches from arts and also philosophy, today is time for science. And for that we have, I'm delighted to introduce you all to Professor Ricard Solé. Ricard, he is an ICRIA professor here at the Pompeu University here in Barcelona, where he leads the Complex Systems Lab. And he's also external professor at the Santa Fe Institute in New Mexico in the States. Ricard has an outstanding career on complexity and complex systems, and in fact his interests are very diverse, from the study of evolutionary of viruses to synthetical biology. And he's been, in fact, combining his academic background, because Ricard has 2 degrees, one in biology and the other in physics, where he earned his PhD. And in fact, this cross-fertilization of disciplines that is very present in his research is also very present beyond the lab. The ones that live in Barcelona, we are lucky enough to benefit from his active participation in the city life. And Ricard has been curator at several editions of the Barcelona Bienal of Science, which is a big festival here of science in the city. And also he's collaborated with the CCCB some years ago as an external advisor of an exhibition very interesting on the future of species. And now he's one of the 2 curators of the new exhibition that's going to open by the end of July on brain or brains. He's written many very interesting books. So today we are going to enjoy his knowledge about complexity and also his ability of raising the right questions. Particularly, how do we merge the boundaries of the possible, that is defined by science, with the endless possibilities given by the arts, or how physics, computation, and biology intersects with science fiction, literature, and art, and allow us to look at the reality with the vision of complexity. So, Ricard, it's a pleasure for us give you the floor, and thank you.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. So I'm a scientist, but I'm a strange kind of scientist. I'm a complex systems scientist, which means that by definition, I'm always moving around the boundaries of things. And in my presentation, I want to discuss what's the take of science about the idea of what's possible and what is not possible, right? To what extent we can say that, from the structure of organisms to the potential for artificial intelligence to get into real intelligence. In science, most questions are still open. Sometimes you have the perspective that science is something about answering things. Where in reality, the fun part is what remains open, which is essentially everything, right? And there's a number of big questions that are still there, and even some of them might sound that, like, why is there something instead of nothing? That sounds like a philosophical question, but it's something that has been taken seriously within science, right? If you want the answer, I can give you afterwards. And from there, there's a lot of complexity that has emerged in evolution. Sometimes you have the perspective, evolution is very central to what I'm going to discuss. Sometimes you have the idea that evolution essentially is about natural selection, survival of the fittest, but that is a perspective that it's only part of the story. A lot of what is really interesting in evolution has to do with the emergence of innovations. So really big differences between previous states like single cells to next state like multicellular. And if you go up to the higher complexity levels, we'll find out questions such as how do language emerges? Human language is a really singular thing. And how things like consciousness emerge. Why consciousness? Why is there? It's a tricky thing, and it's probably a side effect of other things, right? And of course, that links with something that I'm particularly interested, which is what we call the synthetic evolutionary transitions. Now in the lab, we can use synthetic biology, evolutionary robotics, artificial life, to do an exercise that is very interesting, which is recapitulate evolution. So try to see if we can build in the lab actually the things or make them evolve. And that allows actually to approach, again, the same question. Is something going to happen when you do that in the artificial world, when you simulate in a computer? Is something different, essentially, from evolution that's going to happen? Or what evolution has been found over millions of years is essentially what it is, right? Which is the idea that I would like to defend. And in a way, we complexity scientists search for universals to try to find out what is general, what is inevitable, if you want. And you can look at that the other way around. Ask yourself, why some things are not there, right? Why some strange creatures cannot be observed? I take this picture as an example. I'm referring to the strange creature on the right. And so why not lions with wings? We don't observe that, right? We can imagine, but we don't observe it. And I'll go into the creativity thing later on. So the possible and the actual is what we actually explore. I want to mention that a lot of the ideas I'm going to discuss, it's kind of the typical things we discuss in my intellectual home, which is the Santa Fe Institute, a very special place where, as you can see, we use every single piece of material that can be used as a board to write equations. And the reason I'm mentioning is that I think this unique place is kind of the perfect example of joining science and the humanities and in a scientific perspective. There's a number of the people that I've been meeting over the last, I think, 25 years. So I'm one of the eldest now at the Institute. And as you can see, if you give a quick look, those of you who are scientists will find out some people, unfortunately, some of them are not there anymore, like Marie Gell-Mann, the person who found out the quarks. But also you can spot Cormac McCarthy, who was for a very long time our resident writer, which is not bad at all, or Sam Shepard. And in this community, you can also see Dan Dennett. In this community, the question of the universals and the possible and the actual has been around for a very long time. Because this is something that we can address in scientific terms. That's the fun part of the story. So, one of the big issues here actually is what can be predicted, right? If we talk about unique solutions, that means that it should be possible, in a way, to predict what's going to happen in the future. And prediction is also a big issue nowadays in the context of the problem of free will, right? This is a kind of drawing that illustrates the idea of Laplace demon, which is kind of the old metaphor of prediction. Laplace formulated this idea at the time when Newtonian dynamics was clearly a powerful way of predicting the behavior of matter. He said, well, essentially, if you know at this time we know exactly the position and velocities of every single particle, you should be able to use the Newtonian equations, go forward and predict everything. So the future is not unknown. The Laplace demon will be able to do that, to see everything that's going to happen. It's no real freedom. It's just what's going to happen. You know, quantum mechanics changed that a little bit, and other people has turned this the other side. In particular, Stuart Kauffman, one of my old colleagues at the Santa Fe Institute, formulated the idea in a different way. Evolution works by combining things, right? Essentially. That's a very different from an engineering perspective. You have all your pieces here, your genomes, your cells, etc., and you need to use them. You need to do tinkering tinker with that, combining and creating new structures. And it's been pretty successful story, because as you can see, the biosphere is full of really complex things. And Kaufman makes the conjecture that since you can combine, in combination eventually almost gives you an infinite number of possibilities, in reality, evolution cannot be predicted. So you have the other way around, right? I'm trying to explain why this might not be the case. One of the persons who actually thought about that very much was Stephen Jay Gould, the guy on the upper left. And many years ago, he was a paleobiologist, one of the most influential evolutionary biologists in the 20th century. He wrote this very nice book, Wonderful Life, where he uses a metaphor from films. This movie, which you have probably seen because it's usually broadcasted every single Christmas, it's about this guy, to make the long story short, is Frank Capras, and it's a very nice guy, filled of good hopes and good intentions, but with very bad luck. And at some point, he feels like his life has been worthless, and that if he was not alive, the world might have been better. So an angel comes. The angel is a pretty annoying person, but brings the opportunity of making that experiment, right? What would happen if you were not born? And what happens is that a chain of events unleashes as a difference, because he didn't save the life of his brother when he fell in a frozen lake, and his brother saved a bunch of people in the Second World War, etc., 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 and that propagates in the future in terrible ways. So he realizes that his life was special. The whole point of the story is that evolution is highly historical. So the idea is that everything depends on historical events. It's very contingent. Randomness and chance is very important. And he formulated the following thought experiment, which will be interesting for us. If you were able to go back in time and 5,500 million years ago and rerun the tape of evolution before the multicellularity started to explode, how the biosphere will be. And he made this statement that the biosphere will be completely different, totally alien, right? No humans, totally different life forms, etc., etc. Is that true? You could say, well, you cannot prove that because this is an experiment you cannot do. But actually, there's a number of ways of showing that Steve Gould's mental thought experiment might be wrong. And an example that I think illustrates that very well is this computer experiment that Tom Ray, another colleague at the Santa Fe Institute, did 25 years ago. Now it's something very common in the artificial life community, but at that time was very singular. He did the following. He's a real ecologist. So he works in the rainforest in Costa Rica, and he was thinking about, it's a good question, why nature is so diverse, right? Why not just a couple of species of things? Where does diversity come from, and where's complexity come from? And he did the following experiment, which I'm going to just compress in a nutshell as follows. He created computer programs, all of them identical, which seeded the computer, so no rainforest, no nutrients, right? It's just competing by the CPU. And he allowed the programs to mutate. So the programs try to replicate and occupy the CPU, right? From time to time, you make a mistake. And what happened was the following. First of all, there were programs that were shorter. Being shorter is a good thing, because you're small, you replicate faster. Okay, nothing very amazing. But then, and since you have created that, you're God, you can see everything, right? And see the naked programs there. So what he found out was that there were shorter programs that were replicating faster. But when you look at the programs are unable to replicate by themselves. They are parasites. Then there were parasites of the parasites. Then the programs invented something really interesting, which you can call sex. So to escape from parasites, you recombine the genomes, right? You scramble things, because then you can escape. You are not recognized. And eventually, some programs, each one of them not very good replicating by themselves, cooperated to replicate much faster. Not bad, right? Because within a context that is not biological, you actually find out things that recapitulate evolution very well, right? Parasites, something that we believe is completely inevitable at any scale of complex adaptive systems. You find out sex, one of the powerful ways of propelling complexity in evolution, and one of the most important aspects of evolution, sometimes misplaced, which is cooperation. Believe it or not, it is cooperation what has been pushing evolution into high complexity. This has been expanded into many directions. Carl Sims was one of the people who have explored these ideas into bringing embodiment into these artificial constructs, right? Not just genomes in programs, but physical things. And one of the beautiful things, for example, is that if you evolve in a physically meaningful context, where you have to propagate seeds and be stable under stress, what you get is a repertoire of very complex plants and trees, everything totally familiar. There's nothing alien there, right? It's exactly what you find in evolution. So what is possible? And let me bring one of the evidences we have that not everything is possible in evolution. And the eyes are one of the good examples. The eyes that we have, these camera eyes with a lens and retina and everything, this has been invented independently at least 25 times in evolution in totally different groups. You find those eyes in vertebrates, you find in octopuses, you find it in some kinds of jellyfish, believe it or not. And some years ago was even found something totally crazy, which is that you can find this also. This is the picture on the bottom left, within single cells. So there are single cells in the ocean where bacteria that are in the symbionts there combine and make a structure that is nothing but an eye, with a crystalline and everything. This is an absolutely crazy thing. But the idea is the same design is found out again and again and again, right? So this happens in technology, right? Technology rediscovers things again and again. I put the example because we have studied the evolution of technology also, and the light bulb is a neat example. Most people believe that Edison had this idea of the light bulb and just built it. It wasn't exactly like that. And at the time that Edison made the patents, were, I think, that about 20-some patents of light bulbs, right? Of course, the efficiencies were different, but the design principle was found by many different people in totally different locations independently. And the reason, because there's no such a thing as multiple solutions, it's just one. This is one paper I like very much, not very well known, The Logic of Monsters. Was written by this guy, Per Alberg. He was the youngest professor at Harvard, coming from Barcelona. And he was working on the problem of the possible and the actual in a number of ways. And in this paper in particular, he brings the point that even when you look at what we can say teratologies, so embryos that are born with some kind of anomaly, like two heads or things like that, even that, you can classify very well, like in a taxonomy, what's possible, right? And that means that there's for sure very strong constraints about what can be constructed, can be built, right? Not everything is possible at all. Right? And actually, in the paper, he mentions a number of artists, like Bosch or Miró and other people, like kind of bringing the idea, which I think it's interesting to explore here, that it seems that the human mind is kind of an exception. That in a way, you can actually go out of the box and think about everything in totally different ways. Which, let's see if that's true or not. So, for example, what's possible and what's not? Just give a little point. There's a lot of controversy about whether or not plants are intelligent, right? I mean, on the side that that's not the case at all. But we can speculate. And plants bring a very interesting case scenario, because one of the things we believe that brains appear in evolution and are so efficiently used, despite the fact that brains are very expensive, right? Brains are costly, and one of the big questions of complexity is precisely why is the Earth not just filled with bacteria? They're small, they replicate fast. Why organisms with brains? And brains allow us to actually predict the future, and that changes a lot of things, right? It makes the possibility of adapting very, very, a very strong piece of the puzzle. And on the other hand, it's been conjectured that brains, to a large extent, result from moving. Organisms that have to move in an environment that is uncertain and find out their ways need brains, right? So plants don't move. Maybe that's the reason they don't have brains, right? This is a speculation about a plant that could be equipped with kind of neuron-like structures, right? Plants do not have neurons. Or, for example, be carnivores, create a spider web to capture things. You don't see that, right? As well as you don't see other things. But I wanted to point out something. I like to make these drawings and kind of speculate myself. It kind of helps me think. So one of my drawings I did, and I thought, wow, this is such a cool idea, right? Is what about a plant that creates something within the soil that is filled of cavities? That's possible, right? Where ant colonies can actually live, right? And I thought that's a very cool idea. So I put that on Twitter, and someone said, I've seen this before. And the thing is that this has been invented, right? Not underneath the soil, but actually on top of the trees. But there's a plant which actually does exactly that, right? Which actually made me thought about the potential of creativity of myself, right? So could brains and minds be different or better? Let's see what does it mean, right? Let me bring some few glimpses of what is there. Is the brain an optimal object? That's an interesting question. It is and it is not. On the one hand, and that's something I explain to my students, that the brain has been elaborated by tinkering again, right? Within us, we have all the old structures where emotions are really relevant, where things that are far from real cognition control the state of the body. But you have the brain cortex. That's such a huge thing. And on that scale, for example, if you look at the architecture of the small-scale ways in which connections are made, what you see is that when you analyze it, the statistics of the real thing, the biological object, and what engineers have created totally independently without being inspired in evolution to make these highly compact microchips is exactly the same. So what's the lesson here? That you rediscover the same law by totally different directions, meaning that probably that's the only solution that you have. Another thing I like to bring to my students, because that's a lot of speculation again and again and again, in particular by some of these millionaires that are suggesting ideas all the time. Can we improve brains? Can we use chips to actually provide more memory, like in the Matrix? I don't know how to use a helicopter, but what the hell? I put just I download my program in my brain, and now I know, right? Is that possible? My conjecture, it is not. And there are many reasons for that, and there are many reasons for which brains cannot be improved. They are quite amazing objects in its sense. What's the way of really exploiting your brain powers? I have a clue, right? Education. So, what about alternative brains? And again, you can speculate. Across evolution, as I mentioned before, you find out again and again the same solutions very often. So why not a brain that is not made of two brains, like left and right? And what would be the implications? We can think about it, but for many reasons also, unfortunately we don't have all the time to explain, that's not something that will happen, right? Nor in the other diagram in the lower right, nor we can compare brains in computers for many reasons. And this could be the brain where you have a CPU and modules that are separated. The brain is necessarily integrating and segregating things simultaneously, right? And that brings a number of things that are unique to our minds. But one of the things that I think is most interesting, and I will try to convince you that is a worth trying way of approaching the problem from the scientific perspective is, let's go into the whole picture, right? Cognition in nature is there everywhere, right? From single cells to humans. And cognition has many different ways of happening, right? And I think we've just been starting to scratch a little bit of what's there, what could be exploited. In this journal, we co-edited this special issue of what we call liquid brains, right? Liquid brains, solid brains, meaning that when you look into nature, you see all the brains that we call solid. We have the neurons located in particular locations, and where all the interesting stuff happens in the connections, which are essentially weighted and reweighted in time. But what happened with ant colonies, where you have individuals which are kind of these tiny brains, but ants are very simple, they just move around, or the immune system has memory, has learning, to a very large extent behaves like a neural network, except that it's liquid, right? How much we can bring from that, what can be understood, what is different, right? And what evolution has been able to create, and what we could actually create ourselves, no? So is there space for us? So just to point out, I mean, the brain is this solid structure, and for me, the most interesting example is precisely that. Ant colonies, termites, and I want to use the opportunity for actually using that to define what is complexity, because it's sometimes we use the word in a bit, fuzzy ways. We talk about complexity when you have emergent phenomena, meaning that you can look your entire life at a single ant and looking at all the details you want. You will never understand how the ant colony builds a nest, searches over space, decides which is the shortest path to one place to another. That's something that is at the colony level architecture, right? So the properties, and that includes consciousness or memory, etc. for us, the properties that you see on the larger scale, emergent properties, cannot be reduced to the properties of the units, okay? And here again, ants are the other side of the coin in the biosphere. The biosphere has been, unfortunately for the biosphere, has been conquered by humans. We are ecosystem engineers, so we can transform everything on a very large scale. We have an extended mind, so our brain co-evolve with tools and culture in an exceptional way. And there's the other biosphere, where cognition and society is also there, which is brought by ants. It's more or less the same biomass of ants than humans. And in many ways, the success of this society is because they are a society also. They have this extended mind also, which is brought by nests. This is a picture of an ant that doesn't exist. So actually the question here will be, does it make sense to think in an ant colony where ants are very smart? Why ants are, in the end, so to speak, so stupid, right? That ant doesn't exist. That brainy ant doesn't exist. For the same reason that we do not observe that kind of society anywhere. A society, I use Star Trek. I'm not a Trekkie, but I think that the example is very good. They have these boards, which is kind of a society made by individuals who have a really big brains, right? And it's controlled, again, by a queen, etc., etc. The queen, by contrast with ant colonies and actually the monarchies we know, it's smart. And that's not the case in ant colonies. The queen, that just leaves eggs, right? That's not happening. And what about plants? And again, I wanted to bring that example. It's interesting to see that plants have also kind of extended minds, in the sense that they have these extended networks of connections where they can actually cooperate and do other things. But I want to point out, that's exceptional. Plants are incredible organisms for many reasons, right? but there's no such a thing here as any kind of complex memory, like in a vertebrate, right? So the comparison between the intelligence that we have and what plants can bring is totally misleading, right? And actually, if you list what bacteria can do in terms of cooperation, communication, etc., it's not different from what we know right now about plants. But they are kind of alien minds, if you want, right, over there. And octopuses have been very much explored over the last decades because they are, again, a parallel experiment within the invertebrates where brains are invented and a very peculiar way of organizing the brain is there. So you have a real brain. Again, if you look at the microscopic details, you see the neurons, you see layers organized there. You clearly identify what is a brain, like ours, right? Except that for every arm, you have, is usually said a brain. It's a bit simplistic way of saying that. But it's true that there's a redistribution of cognition all over the body, right? And the body is very important. And I use the example also because in the literature, it's interesting that many people, when they want to kind of express the idea of a totally alien entity, they tend to use things like octopuses. And that happens, for example, in The Arrival, right? When you have these peculiar organisms that have language. But for example, octopuses have also these contradictory things. They have this big brain, they learn, they really are pretty smart, right? But they just live 1 or 2 years, right? So there are other very strong constraints about their lifestyle that may be something that blocks totally the possibility of having something that is very important for us, extended minds, like culture, using tools, etc., etc. So that's a drawing about something that doesn't exist. So let's go for the creativity, right? Is human imagination something that has no limits, okay? Imagination has a problem, which is that it doesn't leave much fossils. But we know that this is not exactly the case, right? One good thing for us is that our ancestors left a lot of imagery in the caves, right? I want to point out this was a really extraordinary thing for many reasons. One is that for the first time, our ancestors leave a message for something or create a message for someone who is not there. It's a message for the future. And it's very important for many reasons. Before I go out, this is something I also show to my students. I have this course on principles of biological design, and one of the things that we explore is symmetries, right? In this picture, which is a cave in Argentina, the cave of the hands, there's something interesting that I want to just mention, right? Every single hand is left, right? Which says that the person who actually did that was right-handed, right? So the asymmetry was there. One beautiful kind of illustration of all these ideas is in the Cave of the Dreams. There's the Forgotten Dreams. There's a beautiful movie by Herzog. And I want to point out something that I think is crucial for the rest of the talk, which is our mind singular? And if it's singular, it's special, why is that, right? This is a book I always recommend, The Gap, where Studendorf brings a number of key differences, key outstanding differences from us and everything else in the cognitive biosphere. And I just want to point out into a few things. We have language, extremely powerful one. We are able to recognize the emotions of others, which was something that clearly was important for natural selection to actually push. If I'm in a group of people, it's important to know, are you afraid? You need me? Whatever, right? But that brings into something really interesting, because that means that my brain is able to create an image of what are you thinking? So as soon as I made that, probably having self-consciousness is inevitable, right? I make a theory of the mind of someone else. It's almost inevitable that I do that for myself. So consciousness could be a side effect. And a very, very important trait, which is not in any single machine right now, any artificial intelligence that exists now, which is time traveling. So we are time travelers. We are not only have this huge memory that we reconfigure all the time, but also we can see the future and alternative futures, right? So we have a timeline of everything, including things that do not exist. There's no such a thing in any artificial intelligence, right? Anything that is now here is not different in the artificial counterpart. It's not different from the old mechanical automata. They live in the present, right? And I claim that this is a very, very important part of what has to be done. So language is one of the most powerful ways of creating the narratives. Again, we are surprised by these artificial intelligence systems that create sentences in articulated ways, right? But the real narrative is not there, right? It's a totally different thing. All right. Why evolution is important? Because evolution is a way of exploring things and finding solutions that might not be, sometimes, as you know, sometimes solutions cannot be actually imagined by humans. I also always bring this example that Lucas Stills explored many years ago. When he did these experiments, I tell the story very shortly. He had these two, let's say, robots that were programmed to look around, right? So they had a body. Look around, identify objects, assign a word, right, for an object or an action, a random word, just made up. And then the program also includes talking to the other robot and agreeing about using the same word for the same thing. That's fine, and it ended up with two things. One is expected. I end up in a list, a lexicon to refer to my world that is common. But something unexpected happened. In order to do that, the system had to invent a proto-grammar. So something that made sense, that things happen in time and are connected in ways that are not trivial, right? Not bad, right? Much has to be done in this direction. And going up in the last part, we live now in a very fascinating time, right? If anybody told me 15 years ago, it's going to be a machine that is able to imitate the style of Van Gogh or Turner or Kandinsky, I would have said no. I don't believe that. But it turns out that this just happened, right? This work in particular and the work by other researchers where essentially you train the machine using the word training and learning and things with that. It's also a tricky thing. Machines do not understand anything they are doing, of course. But you can train the machine in a way it abstracts the style. And then you show a picture that Van Gogh never tried even to picture, or maybe never saw, and the machine reinterprets that as Van Gogh. Quite an interesting feat, right? Of course, super specific, and the training involves something that is, I essentially don't know what happens in the machine, right? Now we have a lot of tools that can be used to do that. These are two of them that we use in my lab. One, you put words, like I think there was, on the left was Miro, clouds, night, maybe, right? And the machine kind of makes this. Of course, reuse is a kind of a tinkering process, right? And the right one, that's one of my students, I think is Blade Runner, and I think it was Bruegel, right? And, you know, it's interesting, for sure. My students always bring the question of, okay, then, so what's creativity? How do you know that something is a creative entity, right? And most of the time, the solution seems to be, well, you go into the experts, and the experts will recognize that. But as you know, that's not the case, right? That's another example from fashion. I put some of the math because it's a lot of interesting mathematics there. The machine creates a lot of fashion pieces. You take the experts, and the experts say that only 70, I don't know, I remember very well, but it was kind of, only 70% is done, only 30% is done by machines, but all of them are done by machines, right? So, again, creativity is there. I'm sure we will live in a very interesting time where unlike hair, where you have a really intelligent system that evolves, and again, evolution is important, I think we'll live in an interesting time where machines that are not intelligent by trick our tendency to anthropomorphize all the time will create novel psychological situations. But of course, and as you know also very well, this is invading a lot of the arts, and we'll see how far it's going to happen. But again, if you think in the narrative of a story, there's no machine able to do that. So, I'm almost there. Context is very important, and that's one of the things that, as you also probably know, it's lacking in the path towards general artificial intelligence, right? A friend of mine, Lopez de Mantaras, an artificial intelligence expert, told me that we all know when we say the German Greens have made a turn to the left. We know the context, and it's easy to understand. But it's absolutely far away from anything that is there in the machine world. I use this example also, on the other hand, I think totally amazing Boston Dynamic robots. This video became viral a while ago. You probably have seen it. You have these two dog robots, which actually have an interesting design that departs from the real dogs for a number of reasons. And you see, they have been able to actually get into doing this, right? I remember on Twitter was like, oh, Terminator is already here, our time is over, et cetera, right? I tell my students, what do you think happens once they cross the door? Nothing. I mean, they can do nothing. It's not like, let's go for the next door and find out a human and kill him. It just ends up there, right? And that's part of the rest of the story. That these machines, it's easy to laugh because it's fun for a number of reasons, like the ones I'm going to explain here. But of course, the potentials are enormous, right? So it's just that let's avoid the hype. And these are good examples of how images are misinterpreted, right? Like this one, a woman riding a horse on a dirty road. This is what the machine gives as an interpretation. I mean, it's a very, very strange interpretation, really. An airplane is parked on the tarmac of an airport. I wouldn't say this is just parking. Or a group of people, just standing on the top of a beach, right? Right. So a lot of these problems come from the context, right? And having the context, it's probably inevitably requires the narrative, right? The narrative that makes us able to actually build a real world. A lot has been done. The images I just mentioned are from this paper, building machines that learn to act like people, right? There's a lot of efforts on that direction, but we are pretty much far away. Again, the context. And I think that this illustrates very well. These pieces of art are so evocative, so powerfully evocative for us. Immediately triggers in our mind a lot of ideas, right? Because our brain is able to do all these connections thanks mainly to the fact that we have memories, which are very complex, just stacking things in a network. And because we also have the intentions that our brain is all the time trying to understand stories, right? Just to finish, can we define a space of mind? That's something that is a big challenge that we took in my lab. And it's connected with the idea that some people also have, like Kevin Kelly, has brought, like, at some point we will have artificial intelligences, and there will be alien minds. They will be totally different from anything we know, totally different intelligences. Is that going to be the case? Okay. And I just mentioned some examples, right? Octopuses and plants and ants. These are cognitions that are really complex and very different, but far from our capacity for understanding the world. And there are more examples. Some are totally crazy, like these flatworms, planarias, like the one in the middle. You can train them to actually have little brains. Probably it's the first brain, right? You can train them to learn about something. You cut them from the middle. We know that they regenerate. The front part regenerates the tail, and the tail regenerates everything, including the brain. And the funny thing is that the tail that regenerated the brain has a brain that remembers. So how? Who knows? And that's my last slide. This is our attempt. This is a paper I strongly recommend to you. Evolution of brains and computers, the roads not taken. I did with my former students, Luis Seoane. This is a first attempt to actually build what we call a morphospace of cognitions, right? Where we put 3 axes, we organize things in a qualitative way, right? How complex are computationally in one axis, to what degree they are autonomous. Autonomy is a very important trait of complex adaptive systems, right? The capacity of taking decisions and kind of deciding about your future, right, in a given environment. And on the vertical axis, you have essentially society, whether or not social interactions are important. This is a tentative diagram, but essentially the main message is that it seems that everything artificial is on this side, right? In this corner, where you have all the robots, the machines that you can imagine. And there's a big gap between all this artificial domain and the biological domain, right? To jump from one to the other, and that's why we conjecture in this paper, you need evolution. Evolution has been able to actually manage to create someone like us with language, the emotion detector, and a time machine, a time traveler. So none of these things is right now in anything that we call artificial intelligence. And to get there, we think we need the inspiration of evolutionary dynamics. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Ricard, for this amazing and very evocative talk. We're going to open the room for questions. I cannot see you very well, but there's a question over there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I see the picture on the screen. It's Rafik Anadol work, and then could you comment on that work and this idea of the creation of artworks by, you know, the computer? And I've seen his work and I talked to him, but I would like to hear someone like you talk about it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm actually sorry I didn't mention that because as you see, I wanted to say a lot of things. This piece in particular by Rafik Anadol has been really interesting for me because in a way gives, I think, it's always difficult for scientists to actually find out things that are enough powerful to actually to try to communicate further ideas, right? Particularly for students. But I think that this which was created from real data, from brain recordings, it's, for me at least, it's a kind of a powerful reminder that when you look at the brain, now we have these amazing tools to actually look at not only electroencephalograms, magnetoencephalograms, but also this functional magnetic resonance images that in a way gives us a first glimpse of what areas in the brain are more active when you do particular things. When you see a picture, when you imitate someone, when you lie, very amazing. But it gets, eventually it's short because we know the human mind is much more than just recording the things, right? And in a way, for me, that's of course my personal kind of intuition about this, is that this dynamic thing, I unfortunately don't have the video here, but is very evocative. I think that it's difficult to have someone who looks at that is not just freeze like looking at thing. It's extremely powerful, in my opinion, because it resonates a lot with the complexity of brains. For the same reason, probably, that we like music, right? Maybe not everyone here has stopped sometime and asked yourself, why do we like music, right? Why music? And the thing is that the only answer we can give to that is in very scientific bottom picture-like, is that when you look at the structure of music, right, you see a structure which has fractal properties that you identify pretty much with brain dynamics. So the idea that this resonates is not far-fetched. And in a way, for me, this reminds us of all the hidden dimensions that we don't capture with electric recordings and things like that.
Thank you. We have another question, yes, in the bottom.
Yeah, hi, I'm here in the back row. Hi, I'm Laura. Thanks for the talk, really inspiring. I wanted to ask you, last week I had two scientists for a talk on xenobots, Josh Bongard and Michael Levin, and I think that there is something really interesting also now what you claimed at the end, that where's the evolution and sort of our AI relation, and they have now, those who don't know, they have now sort of looked at this kind of Carl Sims, the early AI sort of models as a simulation. Then they have taken biological cells and basically built that from that. And now they're looking at what's happening. I don't know what's your take on this, but I think it's it's a sort of a little bit, I think, distributed evolution, or is it just human-made? I'm not sure where we are with that.
Okay, I'm glad that you bring this. I know Michael Levin. He's actually one of the co-authors in this special issue of Liquid Brains. We met at the Santa Fe Institute, and hopefully we'll work together on xenobots in the near future. And xenobots, just by accident, I don't have a slide of them here. Xenobots are another instantiation of this idea that cognition, in a way, has to be considered not just only in the neural world. These xenobots have no neurons. They just made with a technology that combines with some engineering and some evolution cells from an amphibian, and that they have a part that moves. And just because they have body and move around, right, they can actually perform things that, at least from the outside, and I think that's not a trivial statement, from the outside you will say, there's cognition there, there's intention, right? Which is another thing that is interesting that some people actually discusses, that when you look at nature, you tend to go into the brains and to the neurons to actually see where cognition is, when in fact you have to actually move a bit more outside that picture. And I want to mention another example that I also didn't mention here. It's in the space of the possible, which is spiders and spider webs, right? In particular, some species of spiders, when you look at the spiders, are extremely tiny, very small brains, right? But the thing is, the spiders have the necessary program to create the web 10,000 times larger than themselves, which is a powerful antenna, has amazing properties of detecting the environment, right? And so the spider actually is kind of a transference of cognition into the material world made by the spider web, which is quite a nice thing, right? Some of these things will be actually in the exhibit that we'll have here on brains, and the brains S is for the other minds, right? So I strongly recommend you, if you're around, to come.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
At the risk of being hagiographic, amazing and inspiring the last hour, so I say that freely. But I wanted to ask you a question about prediction and perception and selection, because it occurred to me on your early slides you talk about prediction, and this is my way of thinking about it. As I'm looking at you now, I'm seeing you very clearly, and I'm seeing you very clearly, and I'm not really seeing the plants in the background. And when I'm listening to your words, I'm predicting what you're going to say next, as well as obviously listening very attentively. And it's the sort of what if and the surprise and the ability in the moment for us to be able to predict and subjunctivize, if I could use that phrase. And I wonder how that adds, or what role you feel that sort of plays in the whole evolution, artificial intelligence, or not particularly intelligent artificial intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it's not a trivial question, and actually you are asking several things simultaneously.
Sorry.
No, thank you. That's one of the big issues, and I think that it helps us to make sense of cognition for a number of reasons. What you mentioned about prediction, and I briefly just mentioned very quickly, it's essential to develop minds, right? Interestingly, for example, in plants, and again, it's my take, we are studying that using models. Plants are just there in the same place everywhere all the time. And so that probably limits a lot the idea of they need to make predictions. There's no need for that. But interestingly, seeds, which are the moving part of the plant, they do incorporate a number of circuits because they have to do decisions and they have to predict what's going to happen to germinate. And so it's interesting that the moving part, it's something that fits that idea. That said, I mean, our brain is pretty much ready for trying to predict all the time, right? Which you were kind of mentioning. And sometimes because of that, and since you mentioned that you see us and not pay much attention to what's behind that, that interestingly happens all the time. And it's also something that we'll have also in our exhibit, that you can make a lot of experiments where essentially, like you have, for example, there's a beautiful one you can do at home. You put a mirror here, your eye here looks at a wall, and you have some picture in the front, and you just make this with your hand, right? And the picture in the behind just disappears. It vanishes, right? Why is that? It's pretty amazing. Because the brain is concentrating, the attention is paid for what is more relevant, what might be more relevant for us, for the future decisions. Its movement is overwhelmingly important, right? So you can actually just remove everything is in the bottom. And on the other hand, I think that one of the interesting things that makes humans peculiar in that respect and part of our enjoyment of life is precisely what escapes from our predictions, right? I will say that if you enjoy my talk, in part, it's because sometimes something unexpected comes over, right? That I'm saying something and then you will maybe elaborating what I'm saying, and all of a sudden, what is that, right? And that's part also of the story. And also this is the part of the prediction and the part of the way we manage novelty that, again, is not in the machines.
Thank you. You mentioned Ramon Mantaras, and he was yesterday sitting at this stage. And at some point, the discussion got really interesting because someone, Sofian, quoted tweet from Ian LeCun, who said there will be no artificial general intelligence because there's no such a thing as a general intelligence. And Ramon disagreed because I think human intelligence is pretty much general. We can do anything, including things that machines do, but perhaps not so efficiently. So I'd like to hear your take on this discussion. And I'm just going to embed another question, which is, I think that part of this general intelligence that humans have is the ability to not follow the program. And we are limited still by, because we use computers that are programmed and they cannot not follow this program. While human and biological brains have this kind of out-of-the-box capacities.
Okay. Yeah, again, it should be a long answer to that. My take here is that we are very far from anything like general intelligence, because at least 3 ingredients that we incorporate and combine in a very fluid way. We don't know if this is a very singular story or it will happen in another species, in an alternative biosphere. But I mean, language, mind reading, and time traveling. That is 3 fundamental things that an artificial intelligence can mimic, can actually make like it works like that, right? But it's not happening. And the way language and the narrative interacts is probably something that over the evolution of the brain is not like separated items that just were evolving. They were clearly co-evolving, right? Along with the extended mind. We made the point also in this paper that a lot of what is missing in artificial intelligence that propelled complex intelligence in evolution is not there. Extended minds, for example, right? The fact that the body, and we know more and more than that the body is relevant. It's not just an object where the interesting part is there. Of course, the brain is the interesting part, but without the interface we have with the world and the way that co-evolved, that of course is a conjecture, right? Maybe somebody comes tomorrow with something, but I think that we are extremely far to get into the general intelligence, because understanding context in particular is something that probably needs the three elements I just mentioned.
Thank you. I'm afraid we're running out of time, but I don't want to cut the discussion, so we're going to take 3 more questions, one there and then here and here. Thank you, please.
Yeah, so thank you for the talk. It was very inspiring. Yeah, so I want to make, let's say, a critical question, but at the same time using speculation. So you might argue that I'm kind of defeating my own purpose, right? But okay, so I was intrigued by your, let's say, strong claim about the intelligence of plants, right? So you said that you are from the side of the debate which sustains that these entities are not intelligent, right? And yeah, I'm kind of wondering how come you are not, let's say, agnostic about that, right? Because, well, in science, right, we know we have limited knowledge about what is happening, and especially with plants, I might argue, let's say that because of the shape of the roots, which are the part of the plants that could be more, let's say, close to what we would imagine as a brain, as you were showing before. For example, because of the shape, then we could even imagine a possibility, so that I'm speculating now, for, let's say, a non-deterministic machine, right? That is a dream beyond the, let's say, the most juicy dreams of quantum information, you know? And at the same time, we know that plants have DNA that is encodes more information than mammals, for example, and we don't know yet about quantum biology, right? So I was just wondering, what are the arguments in the debate, and if you could tell why are you not agnostic about this? Thank you.
Okay, again, thanks for these very interesting questions, but they are for an extended discussion. Okay, let me go very quickly. I'm a skeptic about several things. One is quantum information, right? To be honest, I mean, I still have to hear a single argument that makes serious connection between quantum mechanics and brains, right? I know that is around, but I can give you a lot of arguments against, right? That quantum mechanics has no relevance for that, no need. DNA, yes, but we know very well that the total amount of DNA in an organism doesn't account for organism's complexity. Because if that were the case, there are a lot of organisms that are much simpler in terms of cognition than us, that have a huge genome, right? In the case of plants, just as anecdotal, but it's non-trivial, there are plant species where 90% of the genome is a single parasitic element that has been copying itself like crazy, right? So there's a lot of redundancy there. Should I be agnostic? You know, agnostic for me, it always sounds like you don't want to say you're an atheist, and so you're a coward, and you say, I'm agnostic. But the thing is, we have been taking that very seriously. I think that plants are amazing organisms. If I have to make a totally personal comment, I don't need them to like Mozart. There's no need for that. I mean, they have really triumphed in the biosphere. They are amazingly flexible to adapt to almost anything. But if you take seriously what we know, the state of the art, right? Having no neurons, and you look at what's being called the evidences for cognition, like they cooperate, right? There's a huge abuse of language when this is said by some people, right? Like, you see, they cooperate, they help the others. Let's be careful with that, because bacteria cooperate, And bacteria learn, and bacteria have exactly the same traits that you see in plants. And the reason for that is that it's some bunch of cognition that is simple, but very powerful to be adaptive. And plants take energy from the sun, most of them. They are carnivores, they are, as usually in biology, a lot of exceptions. But life is easy. I mean, you just need to take that energy. So what's the need of taking care about the environment and uncertainties? And the most interesting part of the story is that a lot of the cognition, if you want to call it like that, the responses to the environment are morphological. So morphology is what reacts to the environment. It's a totally different story.
I wanted to thank you for a wonderful keynote, especially the examples and the idea of the fractal nature of being. The particular example by Ricard and your statement, also the shoe paper about the fractal nature of music, and your statement that we resonate with certain artifacts, and aesthetic pleasantness or appreciation comes from that resonance. So in that context, and also that fern behind you, that wonderful artifact of a fractal artifact, I wanted to hear your thoughts on the fractal nature of consciousness and the possibility that we are sort of stuck like a fern on the third layer, and we're trying to make sense of the larger artifact. And also we're trying to build models of AI that model consciousness as we see it, but perhaps we're stuck in one layer, and consciousness happens all around us at levels that are out of reach from us. But again, the point is fractal nature of consciousness. Your thoughts?
Well, well, again, you know, the problem itself of consciousness remains open even in terms of defining it, which is not necessarily, sometimes you say, you cannot even define consciousness how you're going to make a theory. But that could apply to almost everything, right? I have been in so many debates about what is life, right? And that doesn't stop for having a biology, right? But what I can say is that there are a number of things that we still don't understand. The brain, when you look at the architecture, you see this combination of integration and modularity, because you can take advantages of both, but in a way, because of tinkering, that has no counterparts in technology, most of it, right? And one of the things that I just wanted to point out is that one of the things we know very well now, but we don't know exactly what's the meaning connected with the fractal stuff in time, is that when you analyze brain activity, that's something that I also teach my students. You can show that the human brain lives exactly in what we call the age of chaos. So very precise domain that separates order from disorder. And that's something that with physicists we know from a long time ago, from systems experiencing a phase transition. We live there. We live there where the most complex dynamics is possible. That connects with the shape of music, so to speak. But what is the exact meaning of that? How did that emerge? And if you want to connect that with computation, with the exact things that the brain executes, how do you do the connection? We don't know yet.
Hi. Yeah, some really great questions already. I think you've already answered a lot of my question already in different bits, but I'm interested in hearing your particular perspective from this angle. My name's Andy Gracie. I'm an artist. I'm developing a lot of projects around our kind of human reactions and perspectives to existential threat at the moment. So obviously the role that AI has to play in that is really interesting me. And you mentioned in one part of your talk that you were really quite taken aback by how quickly an AI had learned to reproduce a Van Gogh-style painting, for example. And then later you give the example of things like the Boston Dynamics robots, which we agree are kind of fundamentally stupid, and we should have absolutely no concern at all about what's happening in these areas. So at the same time, kind of the theoreticians of science and philosophers of science in institutions like the Future Humanities Institute or the Center for the Study of Existential Risk already classify artificial intelligence as one of the categories of risk to future human potential, civilization, existence, etc., etc. At the same time, scientists such as yourselves are saying, no, this is, for reasons you've already said in other questions, that no, this is, that an aware AI is fundamentally impossible, so we absolutely have nothing to be concerned about. So my question simply is this: are the theoreticians and the philosophy of science overplaying the risk? Have they seen Terminator too many times? Or are scientists such as yourself underplaying the risk? What kind of reality can we expect from this?
Yeah, I mean, well, from the side of the artificial intelligence to being a threat, that's a bit preposterous. I mean, to be a threat, you will need an intention, right? Why, I mean, even saying why is incorrect. I mean, how any of these machines will kind of realize that they have to be a threat for human, they can kill us or something like that. You need all the emotion part of the story, identifying how the other feels about things, right? So have a theory of mind. That's out of the equation. That artificial intelligence is a threat, it's clear, as you know, for the labor market and for other things, that they keep invading the economy in ways that are not necessarily going to be good, right? Without real intelligence. It's more like, how do you use that? But I want to put the other side. I'm very, very much skeptic about many of the claims on artificial intelligence. But for example, within the future of the planet, my lab also works on that, on the idea of terraforming our planet. And one recent advance in that has been an artificial intelligence system that is going to be used to detect what's called warning signals. So you detect from big data changes in the fluctuations of ecological variables that might point out that you're close to a critical boundary, right? So again, as usual in new technologies, there's a bright side and there's a dark side. Right? And in this case, is the hype side. That, I mean, I put again, along with Elon Musk's claim that we are going all to Mars somehow, and that's a solution for something, right? I mean, there's no threat there in terms of what people is saying too often, that artificial intelligence can take over for some reason. I mean, my question is the usual, is how is this going to happen? I mean, what's the causality there?
Thank you, Ricard. So this last question, we leave it here, but I'm sure we'll continue the discussion during the break. Thank you very much. And let's thank Ricard again. Thank you very much, Ricard.